we're getting down to the closing, and of course I'm not J.R. Edwards, as pretty obviously seen. But J.R. asked me to come out and give some reflection. And I have to tell you from my perspective how I see things, if I may take a few minutes to do that. I was 7 years old when Sputnik was launched, and although my parents and everyone around were talking about it, I never had an opportunity to see it, but I knew it was there. And as I got into the 60s and went to a high school, that particular high school was associated with an observatory for which one of the rich druggists in the area had given the high school a 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor, and the chemistry teacher was in charge of it. He was teaching astronomy after school because they wouldn't let him teach it within the curriculum. And so we had a number of kids in that particular astronomy class, and I fell in love with observing the universe through a 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor. I built a variety of instruments associated with it. I took images of the sun because we could filter down the intense sun. I took nebula, and I had a whole series of Mars images, and also a number of Venus transits and Mercury transits, for which some of those images that I took in those instruments and developed on triacs actually ended up in Sky and Telescope that I published before I left high school. Also during that time period, I was watching Star Trek. Now, Star Trek was absolutely wonderful. I watched it from the very first episode. So this is my era of Star Trek. Now, what was going on? Okay, Kirk was calling Scotty. All right, go to warp engines, from a surface of a planet. And he was going with his team to planets all the time and introducing and talking about aliens and creating policies of approach and introducing to me an exciting world that was total fiction. Also during the 60s, what's happening in NASA is we're launching missions to the moon, where planetary scientists and new fields like space physics that was discovering the magnetosphere of the Earth and how far it went and how it interacted with the solar wind. And, of course, Van Allen had already discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, how bad they were as you were traveling back and forth from the Earth to the moon, and landing on the moon and determining what it was like so that we were getting ready for humans to land on the surface of the moon. During that area, more than 25 missions went out into space and to the moon and orbited, took high-resolution images, getting ready for the era. And I was still in high school. My physics teacher had us read Scientific American and give a kind of like a book report every week. And I fell in love with reading Scientific American, and James Van Allen had published his What Did We Find Above the Earth but the Van Allen Radiation Belts, and here are some of the characteristics. Now, I could hardly get through that article. It was very tough to be able to understand what was being talked about, even at that Scientific American level. And I graduated in high school in Burlington, Iowa, and I went to the University of Iowa, and I took a course called Astronomy 101, walking into the room with 450 other students. The absolute place was packed, taught by James Van Allen. And it was fantastic. Now, I was so in love with the ability to observe the universe from a telescope. I already knew when I went to the University of Iowa that I was going to be an astronomer. But Van Allen opened up my eyes because I then began to work with him almost on a one-on-one basis, even as an undergraduate, doing original research with the data I took from that telescope in Burlington, Iowa. And it was fantastic. He taught me how to do scientific research. Also, I had fabulous advisors who said, we will send you anywhere in the world to give a science talk. All you have to do is talk about the research that we're doing here at the University of Iowa and what you're doing. And I was doing 3 talks a year, all over the place. And when I graduated, I had 5 job offers. And at a time when it was hardly possible for one good job offer for some of these graduate students who were absolutely spectacular. And the one I took was a civil servant position at Marshall Space Flight Center. And at that center, I was allowed to do what I needed to do, and I had a number of responsibilities of communicating data and getting it to our co-investigators and analyzing observations from what are called the Dynamics Explorer missions. And of course, at that time, if you wanted to talk to your co-investigators, you went to the wall and you pulled out an instrument that was connected to the wall, and you either called them, faxed them, or telexed them. You know what telex is, right? So that was a very different time, and I recognized the only way we're going to get this massive amount of data to them is to think out of the box. And I was very privileged to be able to start NASA's first internet in 1980. By 85, we had almost 1,000 computers at universities all over the United States connected with users doing all kinds of stuff. We were doing mail, we were doing all the kinds of stuff that you have to do today anyway to even survive. But that was in 1980. And by 85, I'd made a connection into the European Space Agency, and we were sending data back and forth with them. And by 87, we were in Tokyo. And so we were at JAXA. And in 92, we were in Moscow at IKI. So when you look back at where we've come in this era, we've come an enormous distance. We've done an enormous number of things. And of course, while I was at Marshall, I had opportunities then to go to another center, Goddard Space Flight Center, where I ran a division and got involved in instrument building and got those instruments on a spacecraft called Image. I was also a project scientist. And then I had an opportunity to go to NASA headquarters and run the NASA Planetary Science Program, which was an enormous privilege for me for about 12 years. And in that length of time, in 12 years, I was involved in 12 launches. And in fact, it was also during that time, I'm involved with the International Space University, and I've gone to a number of their meetings. And in one of the meetings, John Connolly was there and said, okay, let's call Jessica Meir. Pulled out his phone. Jessica, how are you doing? This was astounding because Jessica Meir was on the International Space Station. I saw that, and Kirk was doing it, in the 60s. Total science fiction. Also total science fiction was the concept after I graduated in 79 that we were going to be able to have any chance of seeing planets orbiting other stars. Just forget it. Now we see even rogue planets, planets that aren't attached to stars. We now know there are more planets in the galaxy than there are stars. And now we're looking for the life that might be on those and might be in our solar system in fabulous ways. We have come an enormous distance. Now, the last couple days, we've really been bathed in some fantastic things. This is one of the reasons why I absolutely love this summit that Explore Mars puts on for many years, and it's just been wonderful. And we've talked about all aspects of the program, but it's all about the now and the future. And I wanted to start tonight with that concept of where we've been. We have come an enormous distance in those 50 years. Where we're going to be in another 50 is going to be unbelievable. So, as we have talked about off and on today, now it's my turn to give you my wish. I wish I had just graduated today from the University of Iowa with my PhD in space physics, knowing what I know. Because the next 50 years will eclipse all the experiences that I've had in the past. And they have been astounding. So, just wanted to give you a little background. You have to appreciate the history because the future is so bright, and we need that history to not repeat the mistakes that we've done in the past. So with